What if the ocean is not just water, but memory? Not the kind we carry in our minds, but the kind the Earth carries in silence. The kind that settles slowly, layer by layer, in darkness 2,000 feet below the surface. The kind that waits. Most of us think of the sea as a boundary, a blue edge at the end of the map, a place where stories dissolve. But beneath the waves, the world does not forget. It archives. There are landscapes down there that no human eye has ever seen directly. Plains of silt untouched for millennia. Canyons deeper than mountains are tall. Places where pressure crushes steel, where sunlight has never reached, where time feels suspended. And yet, every so often, something appears. A shape too straight, a sound too deliberate, a pattern that makes the mind hesitate. Because the deep ocean is supposed to be random, geological, chaotic. It is not supposed to resemble design. It started, as so many discoveries do, with something ordinary. In 2001, a marine engineer named Paulina Zalitsky was scanning the seafloor off the western coast of Cuba. She wasn't chasing legends. She was working for a company searching for shipwrecks, Spanish galleons, lost cargo, the usual dreams that cling to the sea. The technology was practical, side-scan sonar, a method of translating echoes into images, a way of seeing without light. At a depth of more than 2,000 feet, the sonar returned something unexpected. Not the broken skeleton of a ship, but symmetry. The images suggested massive stone structures spread across nearly 2 square kilometers, shapes that looked eerily architectural, pyramidal forms, rectangular blocks, lines that could have been roads. A metropolis resting in crushing darkness. Granite, too. Stone that did not belong there naturally. The implications were impossible. For a city to exist at that location, the sea level would have had to be unimaginably lower. The land would have needed to be dry tens of thousands of years ago, long before our timelines place civilization. History, as we tell it, has neat chapters: agriculture, settlements, cities, empires, but the ocean does not care for neatness. The news broke briefly, like sunlight through clouds. Major institutions expressed interest, plans were spoken of, expeditions promised, and then silence. Funding vanished. Bureaucracy thickened. The story faded into the safe category of sonar anomalies. The shapes became glitches. But machines do not easily hallucinate geometry. And so the first question emerged, quietly, like a bubble rising from the abyss. If something truly rests beneath the Cuban waters, why were we so quick to stop listening? This is where our journey begins, not with certainty, but with wonder. Because the deep sea is filled with echoes of earthquakes, of whales, of shifting ice, and sometimes, perhaps, of forgotten worlds. What lies beneath is not always a secret kept from us. Sometimes it is simply a truth waiting for the courage to be seen. And the ocean, patient as ever, keeps its counsel. For now. It began with a shape, a circle, too perfect to ignore. In June 2011, the Ocean X team, a Swedish group of salvagers, was scanning the floor of the Gulf of Bothnia. Their mission was routine: hunt for sunken World War-era ships, lost champagne, artifacts, the usual ghosts of history. But what their sonar found that day did not belong to history as we know it. 300 feet below the surface, the imaging revealed a disk. Massive, 60 meters across, perfectly round, like a coin punched into the seabed. With lines, straight, geometric, precise. Boxy corridors, what looked like a staircase descending into blackness. To some, it resembled the Millennium Falcon. To others, it looked like a ruin from another world. And then the lights died. As the expedition ship positioned itself over the object, every electronic system on board failed. Phones, GPS, cameras, even the boat's radar. A dead zone. Only when they drifted 200 meters away did the systems flicker back to life. They tried again. Same result. This was not random interference. It was a perimeter. Eventually, divers went down. What they found was not weathered stone or tangled wreckage. It was smooth, angular, a dark, soot-colored material, concrete perhaps, but not like anything they'd seen. Behind the structure stretched a flattened ridge, almost a runway, nearly 1,000 feet long. As if the disk had slid to a stop. Samples were retrieved. Labs in Israel and Stockholm found traces of limonite and goethite, metals, uncommon at those depths, in those concentrations. And yet, the official explanation came swiftly: glacial deposit, a rock dragged by an ice sheet. But glaciers do not emit electromagnetic pulses. They do not sculpt corridors. They do not leave skid marks across the ocean floor. The questions came in waves. Why would a natural rock formation disable electronics? Why the symmetry, the scale, the lingering energy? And if this disk is not a rock, what is it? Theories spiral, as they always do. Ancient machines, crashed vessels, forgotten technology, something buried and still pulsing. But the sea keeps its secrets, and the disk sleeps. We do not know what lies inside, if it is hollow, if it is listening. What we do know is that we found it once, and then chose to leave it alone. Sometimes silence is not absence. Sometimes silence is a warning. And in the cold stillness of the Baltic Sea, something waits beneath the waves. Not buried, not broken, just off, and very much intact. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere. In the summer of 1997, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, was using a Cold War relic for a new kind of listening. A vast underwater microphone network called SOSUS, once tuned to the stealthy thrum of Soviet submarines, was now eavesdropping on the deep. But what they heard that year was not a machine. It was not human. It was a voice. They called it the Bloop. A single, immense, organic-sounding noise that echoed across the Pacific. It was so loud, it was picked up by sensors more than 3,000 miles apart. And yet, no one could identify the source. Here's the thing. The loudest creature on Earth is the blue whale. Its call can travel hundreds of miles, but the bloop wasn't just louder, it was orders of magnitude more powerful. To generate that kind of sound underwater, the source would need to be enormous. Not whale-sized, not even ship-sized, but something beyond scale. What caught scientists off guard wasn't just the volume. It was the voice print, the frequency pattern. It rose and fell like a living thing, like vocal cords at work. Dr. Christopher Fox, a NOAA scientist, initially stated that it sounded biological, alive. But there was no animal known to science that could make such a call. And then the story changed. Suddenly, the bloop was rebranded. An ice quake, they said, a glacier cracking, collapsing somewhere in Antarctica. Harmless, geological, but to the trained ear, the difference is obvious. Ice quakes are chaotic, abrupt, static. The bloop was coherent, rhythmic, purposeful. It didn't crackle, it sang, and then it stopped. No similar signal has ever been recorded again. Not from that region, not with that signature. It was a solo performance in a theater no one knew existed. So what was it? A creature beyond our records? A leviathan we've never seen? Or something else, something that called out once and then vanished? The Pacific is vast, wider than any country, deeper than Mount Everest, is tall. Most of it remains unexplored, and in that abyss, something once made itself known, not with a body, but with a voice. One note, one impossibly loud, living breath, and then silence. We closed the file. We labeled it natural, but the ocean remembers, and every so often late at night, when the waves go still and the microphones are listening, you have to wonder, did we hear the last cry of something ancient, or the first whisper of something waking up? He wasn't looking for history, he was looking for sharks. In 1987, Kihachiro Aratake, a local diver in Japan's Yaeyama Islands, plunged into the stormy waters off Yonaguni, hoping to find new spots to observe hammerheads. The sea here was rough, the currents dangerous, but what he found on the sea floor stopped him cold. It wasn't coral, it wasn't a reef, it was architecture. Rising from the seabed like a submerged fortress was a massive stepped monument. Terraces, walls, and platforms arranged with such precision that it seemed impossible they were natural. Right angles, flat planes, sharp edges. It looked like a sunken temple. Later dubbed the Yonaguni Monument, the formation spans the size of 2 football fields. For some, it resembled a ziggurat, layered and geometric, with what appeared to be staircases carved from solid rock. Geologist Masaki Kimura dedicated over 15 years to mapping it, diving its every corner. What he found challenged the foundation of known history. Structures that resembled temples, a stadium, even a castle. Parallel channels, drainage grooves, and 2 perfectly circular holes, likely post holes, that suggested wooden columns once stood there. And then the most compelling sign, quarry marks, indentations where wedges were driven into stone to break it. A language of labor, the scars of builders. But this site lies underwater. For humans to have shaped it, sea levels must have been far lower. That places its construction, if it was built, at around 10,000 BCE, before the pyramids, before Sumer, before what we call civilization. And still, the official stance remains: natural formation, sandstone fractures, erosion. But nature is messy. It crumbles, it rounds, it does not carve. What makes the monument so unsettling is not just its scale or precision, but its loneliness. No inscriptions, no relics, just shape in the void. If it is a city, it was lost not to conquest, but to water. And if it is not, then it is the most elaborate coincidence in geological history. Either way, it leaves us with a haunting possibility that the story of humanity is older than we've dared to imagine, that civilizations may rise and fall not once, but again and again, erased not by fire, but by tide. The sea does not shout its truths, it carves them in silence, and waits patiently for someone to see. The discovery was accidental, like so many that rewrite what we think we know. In May 2001, scientists from India's National Institute of Ocean Technology were surveying the Gulf of Kambat, not for ruins, but for pollution. It was a standard environmental scan, but the sonar told a different story. Beneath the sediment-laden water, 120 feet down, the acoustic images revealed lines, grids, structures, a city, not a scattered settlement, but a sprawling metropolis stretching 5 miles along an ancient submerged riverbed. There were roads, drainage systems, even what appeared to be a massive dam, nearly 2,000 feet long. The deeper they looked, the more impossible it became. When they dredged the site, it wasn't just stone they recovered, it was culture, pottery shards, semi-precious beads, carved ivory, and most critically, a piece of carbonized wood. The wood was sent for analysis, and then the number came back. 7,500 BCE. That's nearly 9,500 years ago, thousands of years older than Mesopotamia or the Egyptian pyramids. 5 millennia before the supposed dawn of civilization. This city had plumbing while the rest of humanity was still chasing mammoths. It shook the academic world. And then, predictably, came the retreat. Critics suggested the wood was driftwood, carried by currents, that the sonar images were just strange geology, that it was all a misunderstanding. But rocks don't carve ivory. Rocks don't arrange themselves into urban grids. Rocks don't burn into carbon and survive for 9 millennia. The implications were too dangerous. If the timeline shifts once, it might have to shift again and again. Because if a civilization this advanced could be forgotten, what else lies buried? Flood myths exist in nearly every culture. Stories of great cities swallowed by rising seas. We call them metaphors, but maybe they're memories. If this submerged city is real, it belongs to a world we've lost. A world that lived before the oceans came for the coasts. A mother civilization erased by water, its ruins sleeping in the mud. And if we found one, how many others lie waiting? How many times has humanity started over? We think of time as a ladder, but maybe it's a spiral. And somewhere, deep beneath the waves, the past is still whispering. If we choose to listen, it was a single frame, an image pulled from the blackest depths of the sea. In 1964, the USNS Eltonin, a research vessel equipped with deep-sea cameras, was trawling the desolate waters west of Cape Horn. Its mission was oceanographic, officially peaceful. But the Cold War lurked behind every expedition. Every cable dropped into the abyss was also an ear, listening for submarines. At 13,500 feet below the surface, an alien realm of eternal pressure and cold, a camera captured something strange. When the film was developed, frame number 13 held an anomaly. There, standing upright in the mud, was an object that did not belong. A vertical mast. Symmetrical crossbars radiating at 90-degree angles, each tipped with a small sphere. It looked mechanical, deliberate, like an antenna. In the black vacuum of the ocean floor, surrounded by lifeless silt, this rigid structure stood alone. No debris, no tracks, no chaos, just order, in a place where order does not belong. At first, it sparked whispers. Was it a relic, a probe, a signal tower? Something lost, or something still active? The photo circulated in underground circles. It became known as the Eltonin antenna, but years later, the mystery was swept aside with a shrug. Marine biologists declared it to be a sponge. Cladohyza, a carnivorous species with branching arms. Case closed. But side by side, the comparison fails. The sponge is organic, wavy, irregular, chaotic. The object in the photograph is clean, symmetrical, precise. The geometry is unmistakable. Skeptics point to coincidence, nature's strange mimicry. But even in the chaotic creativity of biology, perfection is rare. And the Eltonin object was perfect. The ocean floor has been surveyed for decades. Why was this sponge never seen before or since? And why, at a time of global espionage and paranoia, did the only mechanical-looking structure found in the deep just happen to resemble a listening device? The sea, after all, is the perfect hiding place. Cold, silent, vast, beyond comprehension. If someone, or something, wanted to observe undetected, this would be the place to do it. Maybe it was just biology, misunderstood, or maybe we caught a glimpse of something watching us back. One frame, one object, one question that still stands. What else is down there that we've already seen, but refused to understand? The deepest place on Earth is not silent. In 2014, researchers from Oregon State University sent autonomous gliders into the Mariana Trench. These machines weren't looking for life or ruins. They were measuring sound, establishing a baseline of the trench's ambient noise. Earthquakes, currents, pressure pops, but the ocean gave them something unexpected. A call. They named it the Bio-Twang. It lasted just 3.5 seconds, but what a strange 3 seconds they were. The sound began like a whale song, low, mournful, organic. But then, without warning, it shifted. A high-pitched metallic ring surged upward, screaming to 8,000 hertz. The sound shimmered with clarity, too clear, too mechanical. To the scientists, it was curious. To others, unsettling. Because biology doesn't usually sound like this. Whales moan, dolphins click, shrimp snap. But this was clean, precise, like a sonar ping wrapped in the voice of a beast, a sound that split the difference between biology and technology. Eventually, researchers labeled it a new minke whale call, a regional dialect. Unusual, yes, but not unprecedented. Case closed. But was it? The shortcut detective listens differently, because minke whales are creatures of rhythm. They pulse, they repeat, they sing in loops. The Bio-Twang was singular, sharp, too wide in frequency, and it was heard year-round, unusual for a species that migrates. Even stranger, the sound matched no known vocal profile of minke whales in other regions, and the metallic quality brushed aside. But when you hear the clip, it doesn't feel like nature. It feels like a system waking up, a beacon, a machine, a form of communication we've mistaken for life, or perhaps both. What if the gliders didn't overhear a whale, but something else entirely? Something not biological, but not quite artificial either. An echo of an ancient intelligence. A status check from the deep. We often draw a sharp line between machine and animal, between pulse and ping. But the ocean blurs those lines. And somewhere in the trench, 36,000 feet below, something sang once. We called it a whale. But whales don't hum in binary. And nature doesn't usually sound like it's made of steel. Something called out from the bottom of the world, and it's still waiting for a reply. For centuries, sailors returned from the Indian Ocean with stories that made no sense. They spoke of nights when the sea itself glowed, not with scattered bioluminescent sparkles, but with a solid, unbroken white light. An ocean turned to milk, a glowing plain that stretched from horizon to horizon, erasing the line between water and sky. They were dismissed, of course. Hallucinations, said the scientists, the ravings of exhausted men lost at sea. Bioluminescence doesn't work that way. It flickers. It flashes. It doesn't shine. But on January 25, 1995, the SS Lima, a British merchant vessel, entered the myth. Sailing off the coast of Somalia, the crew reported something extraordinary. The sea around them had turned luminous. The captain described the glow as coming from below, like floodlights shining up through the waves. And this time, there was proof. In 2005, Dr. Stephen Miller of the Naval Research Laboratory examined satellite data from the Defense Meteorological Satellite Program. And there it was, a glowing smear the size of Connecticut. The event lasted 3 full nights, This wasn't a patch of glowing plankton. It was a phenomenon. The explanation came in the form of quorum sensing, a theory that trillions of bacteria, Vibrio havaei, had synchronized their light emissions. But that raises another question. Why? Why would microscopic organisms coordinate to produce a continuous field of light over 15,000 square kilometers? Why burn that much energy? Evolution rarely rewards visibility, unless the light wasn't for them, unless it was a signal, a beacon. Some suggest that the bacteria may be reacting to stimuli from deep below, geological, electromagnetic, or something else. Perhaps the sea is not glowing on its own. Perhaps it's being lit. We've verified the event. We've mapped it from space. And still, we don't fully understand it. Was it a natural marvel? Or did something massive beneath the crust stir for a moment, radiating energy, forcing the sea to announce its presence? A lighthouse doesn't exist for itself. It shines so that someone, somewhere, knows where to look. And on those rare nights, when the ocean turns to milk, the planet glows with memory. A reminder that something vast still lives beneath the waves, and every once in a while, it leaves the lights on. It began with a long, lonely moan from the deep. On March 1st, 1999, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, was monitoring its underwater acoustic network in the equatorial Pacific. A hum of background noise filled the ocean's quiet tapestry. Then the pattern broke. A sound emerged. Not sharp, not explosive, but mournful. They called it Julia. The noise lasted for 15 seconds, a slow, dragging whine that rose and fell like breath slowed to the speed of tectonics. But this wasn't the sharp crack of shifting plates. It wasn't the chatter of marine life. It sounded hauntingly like a voice. And it was loud, loud enough that every sensor in NOAA's Pacific array picked it up. That's thousands of miles of dense water, all ringing with the same cry. You don't get that kind of range from a local phenomenon. The official story came later. An iceberg. A massive chunk of glacial ice scraping the sea floor. But ice doesn't sing. It grinds. It shudders. It collapses in violent, chaotic bursts. Julia was different. It had shape, tone, modulation. Some who analyzed the spectrogram noted its similarity to a slowed-down human vocalization. Not speech exactly, but something like a call, a lament. Then came the silence. Julia has not been heard again. Not that sound, not in that place. Icebergs run aground all the time. So why only once? The location between the Bransfield Strait and Cape Adare is desolate, remote, a place of isolation and cold where few sounds are born. And yet something once cried out there, loud enough to cross an ocean. What if it wasn't the sound of something breaking? What if it was the sound of something waking? Or worse, something crying out and not being heard? We catalog these events. We tag them with harmless names. The Bloop, the Bio-Twang, Julia, like naming a storm. But what if they aren't just noises? What if they're attempts? Attempts to reach, attempts to be known. The ocean is full of stories that never reach the surface. And once in a while, one of them sings. Even if we pretend we didn't hear it. It looked like a road built by hands, long vanished. In September 1968, marine biologist J. Manson Valentine was diving off the coast of North Bimini in the Bahamas when he glanced down and froze. Just 18 feet beneath the surface, beneath the gentle sway of the waves, stretched a massive pavement of limestone blocks. Not scattered, not chaotic, aligned, fitted, purposeful, a half-mile long. Some stones measured as much as 12 feet across. Many were placed atop smaller leveling rocks, shims, adjusting for the uneven sea floor. Nature doesn't use shims. It was a road, or something like one. To many, it was confirmation of a prophecy. Decades earlier, mystic Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, had claimed that ruins from Atlantis would rise near Bimini in 1968. Here they were. Predictably, scientists stepped in with explanations. The formation was beach rock, a natural fracture pattern of limestone, created by tides and pressure. But beach rock forms in place. It doesn't stack. It doesn't curve into a deliberate J-turn as the Bimini structure does, bending toward what might have once been a harbor. It looks like a breakwater, a causeway, the front step of a city swallowed by time. And if sea levels were lower 10,000 years ago, as we know they were, then this road wouldn't have been underwater at all. It would have been part of a thriving coastal world. But that world is gone, and in its place, we find a boulevard to nowhere. The Bimini Road sits at the intersection of myth and measurement. It looks too human to dismiss, too ancient to place neatly within our timeline. If it truly is the remnant of a sunken civilization, then it was not alone. It was part of something larger, something lost. We often speak of Atlantis like a fairy tale, but sometimes fairy tales are just memories written in metaphor. We call it the Bimini Road. But a road implies destination. And if we follow it deeper, what do we find? Maybe not Atlantis. Maybe something older still, a forgotten shoreline. And the first stones of a city that time tried to erase but couldn't quite hide. It sounded cute. The whistle, they called it. But what Noah recorded in the South Pacific wasn't endearing. It was unnerving. In July 1997, just weeks after the Bloop, the same underwater microphone network picked up another anomalous sound. Shorter, sharper, a rising tone, almost electronic in its purity. Like a siren winding up, then vanishing. It lasted only a few seconds, but it too traveled thousands of miles underwater. A sound that loud, that distinct, should have come from something massive or something mechanical. It didn't match any known marine animal. It didn't match any submarine or geological profile. Just a tone, brief, rising, alone. Official explanations again leaned on ice. Perhaps a glacial tremor, perhaps shifting tectonic plates. But the signature was too clean, too controlled. It sounded less like a crack and more like a test, a systems check. Others likened it to a warning, a beacon, an alarm. What if it wasn't made for us? What if it was meant for something or someone else, like an acoustic handshake, pulsing through the deep, waiting for a reply? The whistle was never heard again, at least not publicly, but taken together with the Bloop, the Julia, the Bio-Twang, it begins to form a pattern. Not random, not natural, intentional. Signals, separated by time, by tone, but connected by one trait, scale. Each was vast. Each was powerful. Each was singular, as if someone or something was experimenting with sound itself, feeling for the edges of our awareness, daring us to listen. The ocean has always been a place of mystery, a place where science meets silence, where myths and measurements blur. And perhaps, in that darkness, something waits. Not monstrous, not malicious, just older and more curious than we ever imagined. The whistle may be gone, but the echo still lingers, calling out across the water, long after we've stopped paying attention. It began as a search for gold and ended in silence. In 2001, marine engineer Paulina Zalitsky wasn't hunting for mysteries. She was scanning the deep waters off Cuba's western coast for sunken Spanish galleons, lost treasure, coins, history's forgotten wealth. Her equipment was cutting-edge, side-scan sonar designed to read the contours of the seafloor at depths where light does not reach. What it revealed was not a ship, it was a city. At over 2,000 feet deep, the sonar captured a sprawling site, nearly 2 square kilometers, marked by symmetrical stone structures. Massive blocks of granite arranged in patterns, shapes that resembled pyramids, roads, and rectangular buildings. Not natural, not random. Granite, notably, does not occur naturally on that part of the ocean floor. It had to be brought there. It had to be placed. The implications were staggering. For such a city to have once stood above sea level, the ocean would have to be more than 2,000 feet lower, something not seen since at least 50,000 years ago. That's tens of thousands of years before any known civilization, before agriculture, before writing, before the very idea of cities. The discovery briefly ignited global excitement. National Geographic expressed interest. Major scientific bodies prepared expeditions. Submarines and film crews were readied. And then, quiet. Funding disappeared. Permissions were revoked. Zalitsky was suddenly entangled in bureaucratic red tape. The narrative shifted. The sonar images were declared anomalies, glitches, nothing to see, but sonar doesn't hallucinate right angles, and bureaucracies don't vanish over nothing. Some suggest politics played a role, that the location off the coast of Cuba made further exploration diplomatically difficult. Others believe the implications were simply too disruptive. A civilization 50,000 years old would shatter our current historical framework. Whatever the reason, the project was shelved. The city, if that's what it was, returned to darkness. But the data remains, the images exist, and so do the questions. Who could have built such a place? What knowledge was lost when the sea claimed it? And perhaps most hauntingly, what kind of power is required not to hide the past, but to erase it twice, the first time by flood, the second time by silence? It was meant to be a simple scan. In the summer of 1997, the NOAA hydrophone network picked up another strange signal. But this one didn't carry the organic echo of the bloop or the ghostly resonance of Julia. It was sharper, a burst, a glitch, a digital stutter embedded in water. They called it upsweep. Unlike the other sounds, this one wasn't singular. It repeated, it pulsed, it evolved. Originating from somewhere near the Pacific volcanic chain, upsweep was a series of short, narrow-band bursts, rising in pitch like a slow-motion alarm. And it never stopped. Since it was first detected, the signal has continued seasonally, often loudest in spring and autumn. No one knows why. Some have suggested underwater volcanic activity. Others propose it's ice movement. But these explanations come wrapped in uncertainty. They don't fit the precision, the rhythm, the modulation. Upsweep doesn't sound like the Earth groaning. It sounds like the Earth checking in, like a system test. But for what? And for whom? What's more disturbing is its consistency. While other anomalous signals, like the Bloop or Julia, came and went, upsweep persists, year after year, whispering across the Pacific like a steady heartbeat beneath the waves. It's tempting to dismiss it. It's easier to say it's just another mystery of geology. But deep listening tells a different story. The pattern isn't chaotic, it's structured. And structure implies design. We've built an entire field of science around interpreting signals. We scan the stars for radio waves. We dissect frequencies for meaning. But when the deep ocean sends something unusual, we look away. Maybe because it's too close. Because if upsweep is not geological, then something is still down there. Active, repeating, watching. We call it an anomaly. But what if it's a broadcast? What if, buried beneath miles of water and pressure, something ancient is transmitting steadily, patiently, waiting for the surface world to listen long enough to understand? The ocean may be Earth's oldest vault, and perhaps, just perhaps, it's still sending signals from before memory began. Signals not meant to be heard until we're ready, or until it's too late. The sea does not forget. Over thousands of years, continents shift, ice melts, and civilizations fall. But the ocean holds the debris of memory, quietly, completely. It is not a place of endings. It is a vault of beginnings. From the sonar echoes off Cuba's coast to the cold electric silence above the Baltic disk. From the groaning voice of Julia to the mechanical twang of something deep in the Mariana Trench. The stories converge on one truth. We are not the first. Again and again, the ocean has whispered of things too old to name. Cities buried under sediment. Sounds with no mouths to make them. Structures shaped by satans that history does not record. Voices rising from blackness cut off mid-sentence. And each time we listen, truly listen, we are met with something uncanny. Not terror, not confirmation, but recognition, as if part of us already knows, already remembers. We build our history in layers, chronologies, timelines, names, but the ocean builds in silence. And its silence is honest. The question has never been, did something come before us? The question is, how many times have we forgotten? Civilizations may rise like breath and fall like tides, but the ocean remains. It does not argue. It archives. And now, as technology lets us peer deeper, hear farther, and map with clarity, we are approaching a truth we may not be ready for. That we are not the pinnacle. That memory is older than our records. That long before the written word, there were other voices, other cities, other calls. We named the anomalies. We labeled the mysteries. But we never really answered them. Not because we couldn't, but because answering them might mean rewriting everything we thought we knew. So the deep waits, and we float above it, fragile and curious, a species stumbling into its forgotten past, one impossible signal at a time, not with fanfare, but with a whisper, because the truth is not buried. It is submerged, waiting always to be heard again.